This morning, my mind and the minds of my colleagues at Hill+Knowlton are very much with another leader in our industry, our friend and Vice Chairman Frank Mankiewicz is being laid to rest today in Washington. If you'll just give me a few moments on this. From his service to Bobby Kennedy, to leading the Peace Corps, to heading NPR, to leadership at our firm, Frank's list of accomplishments is very long indeed, but much longer is the list of people his stories, wit, and advice have influenced. I knew Frank for 25 years. I was a new friend of Frank's for 25 years. He was one of the first people to reach out to me and offer advice when I was named President of the Americas 3 months ago. I was getting ready to meet him on my first trip to Washington when his health took a turn. And now, today, I find I'm profoundly regretting not getting his advice and wondering what insights he had to offer. Now, those insights might have been similar to the advice he gave to a colleague in our Washington office a few years ago, when she asked him, "What are the keys to success?" He said, "No matter where you are, politics or business, they're always the same. Tell the truth, be nice, be helpful." And he added, "The most important thing you have is your reputation and your friends." What a simple and profound path forward for all of us. To be truthful, to be nice, and to be helpful. That's it, isn't it? Those same attributes can be keys to success for organizations we represent as well. Now, in corporate speak, we use words like integrity, trust, reliability to describe what Frank is saying. Last year at this summit, we talked about communicating character. That research that we presented told us that successful organizations always practice what they preached, and that the gap between values and behavior is what separates good from great. In effect, it's about helping clients take the very steps that Frank suggests are necessary for success. We've also found it rewarding to take a good long look at our own character at H+K and how we communicate it to eliminate any gaps between our own values and behaviors. With that in mind, for example, we've created our first sustainability report. We've taken an honest look at our U.S. operations, inviting input from our clients, partners, and other stakeholders on how we're doing and what we can do to continue on our sustainability momentum. You'll see that report in a few weeks. We've also launched an ambitious employee retention initiative. We all know that in this industry, our people, our talent, is what makes us great. And yet one challenge our industry has continually failed to address is our high staff turnover rates. If we want to retain the best talent, we need to commit to being better than just accepting high rates of staff churn. In our U.S. operation, we did this earlier this month by revamping policy commitments to our people called H+K Inside and H+K Outside. Juggling work and life in a 24/7 business will always be a challenge. We're committing to benefits and programs to make the blend between the two more manageable. That's the socially conscious thing to do. In particular, we want to make H+K the best place in the industry for working parents. These new policies include industry-leading maternity and paternity leave, including 16 full weeks of paid maternity, plus up to an additional 2 months if mom requires it, 10 full weeks of paternity leave, and numerous flexibility options for working parents, and in fact for all employees. These are just a few ways we're actively working to align our behaviors with our values, which communicating character demands. So that leads us to this morning's conversation. We're excited to share today new research that takes the notion of communicating character one more step. Specifically, it considers the evolution of CSR communication and how organizations can benefit by highly targeting those consumers whose buying and advocacy behavior respond to your CSR story. I'm very pleased to have Michael Lustina, president of our research arm here, to share that research with you. Michael? And we're very excited to have outstanding panelists. Each of them represents an organization that is taking interesting and innovative steps in communicating their CSR stories. With us today, we have Daniel Duty. Daniel, Vice President of Global Affairs and Social Responsibility for Target. Michael McCaffrey, Senior Director of Corporate Communication for Johnson&Johnson. And Claudia Cortes, Vice President of Corporate Affairs for SAP Asia Pacific, Japan. Guys, thank you very much for being with us here today. Everybody, please join me in welcoming them to the stage at this time. Michael, over to you.
Okay, thank you for having us here today. We're excited to have these three be on our panel today, and I think we want to dive right into the discussion. We have a lot of good conversation to have today. I'd like to start just with a little understanding of your career path and how it involved CSR, what drew you to CSR, and also how you've seen your company evolve its CSR platform or its interest in CSR over the recent years. Just as an introduction to help everybody understand who we have on the panel here, and Daniel, let's start with you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Daniel Duty. I'm with Target. My CSR journey, how did I get here? I'm not quite sure, quite frankly. I think I was always searching for CSR and to be involved in corporate or socially responsible activities, but it wasn't until recently that I actually found it. When I graduated college, I had a degree in political science and German, which of course meant I had no job prospects whatsoever. So I huddled off to Washington, D.C., because it felt like that was the place to do some social good in the world. And I ended up working for a guy named Paul Simon, who was a senator from Illinois, who really represented, in my mind, one of the great minds around what we could do to make this world a better place. And I also thought I could change the world by going to law school, and that was definitely a mistake. But actually, it was a great experience. Ended up being a lawyer for some time. But over time, I worked in the U.S. government, worked for General Mills as a lawyer, decided that wanted to do something even more meaningful. Started my own business, which led me to Target, where I developed their strategic partnership program, which was really finding ways to build coalitions with people to really make business better for everybody at the end of the day. That led me into taking on the strategy role at Target, trying to figure out what we do to continue to grow. And that's where I really became interested in the concept of CSR and the ability of corporations to really change the world for the better. And I was lucky enough about almost 2 years ago to get tapped to create a new position at Target called Global Affairs, whose main responsibility is building the corporate social responsibility program. And we're at a really interesting time in our journey as a company. Since the 1800s, Target has been a leader in giving money to the community for being a philanthropic giant. We give about $4 million a week away to causes around the world. But we've realized that the world of CSR and the role we need to play in that has changed dramatically, and that consumers, and our guests as we call them, are less concerned about what type of money you're giving in the world, but what are you actually doing to make the world a better place. And so we're on a journey, which I'll speak a little bit more of in a minute, on how do you make the world a better place in a way that matters to this new generation, to this millennial generation, but is also authentic to our own values and purposes. And so I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit of that journey with you this morning.
Great, Michael?
Sure, so I'm Michael McCaffrey, and I have a slightly different story. I wasn't actively seeking CSR, and I don't profess to be a CSR expert by any means. I head the Insights and Analytics group within our global communications team, our corporate communications team. And I've been with Johnson&Johnson for about 20 years. And what I was really seeking was an opportunity to function more at the corporate, at the enterprise level, really focusing on the Johnson&Johnson corporate brand. So I've been with Johnson&Johnson for 20 years. We're a very decentralized company, as many of you know. We have about 270 operating companies operating in over 65 countries. And I've worked on many of those businesses. I've worked on many of our major brands, such as Tylenol, Motrin, Aveeno, AccuView contact lenses, and a number of our different pharmaceutical businesses as well. And I was seeking something that would give me a different vantage point beyond supporting brands, really something at the corporate level. I was very interested in reputation and corporate brand and corporate equity. And it just happened to be at a time when the company was beginning to take these issues a little bit more seriously around our equity and around our reputation. And our global communications group really wanted to take more of an outside-in perspective and build an insights and analytics capability within the function that never really existed before. And so they knew they needed to go outside and bring that expertise in. And they were looking for someone inside the company who really knew the company, had experience working on a number of the businesses, but also had the expertise to come in and really run that kind of a function and help us get our arms around this concept of reputation and what is reputation. And how do we manage it? And what is a corporate brand? And how do you think about a corporate brand? And how do you build brand equity? So it was a perfect match. I jumped on the opportunity, and I've been in this job for about 2 years now. And that's what I've set off to do, is to bring in that expertise and to build that capability. I'd say CSR is nothing new to Johnson&Johnson. It's part of our DNA. It's who we are. We're a company with a very long history of doing social good, of philanthropy, citizenship, and sustainability. And it's really anchored in a document that we call our Credo, which was written by one of our founding fathers, Robert Wood Johnson, 70 years ago. And it's really a document that outlines the principles by which we act, by which we run our businesses, and make decisions. And at the very top of that document, it states that the very first responsibility that we have is to the moms and the dads and the doctors and the patients and the nurses and everybody who uses our products. And we have a responsibility to the communities in which we operate and the communities in which we live and work and the global communities as well, and to our environment. So this was written 70 years ago before there was even a term called CSR. And it's just something that we, as a company, it's what we embrace internally as individuals, and it's our core purpose as a company, and it drives a lot of our actions and how we operate in our businesses. I'd say in terms of how that's changed over the years, really it hasn't changed very much for us. We still do it, and we do it well. But what has changed, I guess, is our willingness to talk about it. We had a term that we like to kick around, and that is that Johnson&Johnson likes to get caught doing good. And we're trying to kind of change that now and bring more of our stories forward to our stakeholders, because we do have a tremendous story to tell. And there are segments of the market that are interested in hearing those stories, and we want to make them accessible to those individuals. And we want to be a little bit more proactive, not in a boastful way, because that's not who we are, but in a way that's really authentic to who we are as a company, to our values, and to our purpose of caring for the world one person at a time. I'd also say that one other thing we're focused on is showing up as more of an enterprise. I think historically, Johnson&Johnson has showed up in many ways to their stakeholders as different operating companies. And we're trying to harness the power of the enterprise now and show up more as J&J, because the reality is that people are becoming more aware of the breadth of our businesses. And we are the most broadly based healthcare company, which makes us very different than our competitors, very different than other pharmaceutical companies, very different than other consumer companies. The breadth of our businesses, we have businesses in the consumer sector, we have businesses in pharmaceuticals, and we have businesses in MD&D, medical device and diagnostics. So we want to begin to really bring that story together and really begin to tell it in a way that is interesting and is motivating to our stakeholders, and really allows them to see how Johnson&Johnson does touch their lives in so many ways and helps people live longer, healthier, happier lives.
Great. Claudia?
I'm Claudia Cortes. I manage corporate communications for SAP, and I recently finished my assignment in Asia, and I have been asked to join the Global Corporate Affairs as head of content strategy. So how did I get into CSR? As Daniel, I finished political science, and I thought I was going to save the world, right? And guess what? I realized I was not to. And then, of course, CSR has been part of my personal DNA. I have been involved on certain social issues in Colombia and also in US. Now, how I started to work in CSR, I think I have been in the IT industry for 16, 17 years. And at the beginning, I remember that CSR was not one of the top priorities of our management. And I think I brought my personal agenda into the business. And this is how the journey started. And then I have to say, SAP, expand this experience, and we have 6 function areas in the region, and one of them is, of course, corporate social responsibility. And we have been, trying to grow this area as much as we can, and we are moving from, charity perception into creating social impact in the communities where we are present. So that's the journey that we have been doing all the way. So.
Well, great. I think it's interesting that no matter whether each of us sought out CSR or it sought us out, it's becoming something that's more and more important in our society and for our corporations. So I think more and more people are going to become connected with it, which makes it for quite an interesting discussion here. Daniel, I'd be interested in what you find most interesting about building a corporate social responsibility strategy and the implications for communicating that.
Yeah. As I alluded to earlier, we're really on that journey, and you and I have been on that journey together to some extent with H+K. And there's a couple of insights that I think I would share about building a corporate strategy and what's changed in the world and the implications for communications. First of all, I think it's very clear that the millennial generation in particular, this next generation of consumers, is very interested in outcomes and not as interested in inputs. And so what I mean by that is corporations for years have been talking about how much money they're spending on CSR types of programs. And Target's a great example. We pledged to over $1 billion towards education and thought, wow, that's amazing, $1 billion. But guess what? The millennial generation doesn't really care if you're spending $1 or $1 billion. What they want to know is, what is the outcome that you've produced? How have you changed society? And that makes it more difficult from a communications perspective, I think, because it's no longer a message, $1 billion. It is about a journey, and you're on a journey to solve a problem. And that means that our communications messages may not always be tied up in such a nice bow because there will be ups and downs along that journey. It also means because we're focused on outcomes, it's less about philanthropy and it is more about problem solving. And so again, many of you know that problem solving is a messy, sausage-making kind of ordeal that's hard to communicate. But what we also know, another insight, is that folks want us to be authentic. They want us to be authentic and tell those raw human stories about the journey that we're on to solve problems. And so as communicators, we have to get over the notion that things are going to be all perfect and that it is going to be this kind of raw kind of messaging that goes out over time. Sometimes saying we're making great progress and sometimes saying we're not making great progress, but stick with us. And quite frankly, the research we've done shows that where you are authentic and you let folks know that you may not even be meeting your goals, your reputation kind of scores go off the roof because you are being authentic with them. And so I think that's a really important part of this journey. I think the second or third insight is that, again, it is no longer about just creating social value, but it's about creating business and social value. And so from a strategic perspective, we're looking at ways that we can change the world that both drive our business and drive social impact in the world. And again, I think in order to sustain this for the long term, from a corporate side, that's really important. Again, how do you tell a story of doing good in the world, but also pushing your business forward, makes it just more of a complex message, I think, for communicators, and something we're really thinking through. I guess the last insight I would share with you is that it's much more today about being locally relevant than it is about being nationally or internationally relevant. And for many big companies especially, we have focused on big programs that have big impact around the world. But more and more, again, this next generation is looking for impact at home, in their local community, in their local school, whatever it might be. And so finding ways to be locally relevant, but also making impact at on a bigger scale is a really interesting part of the strategy piece and where we need to go. And again, I think that has communications implications because telling lots of small stories in communities, hoping that it'll ladder up to a big story, is much more difficult than just telling one big story. Mm-hmm. And so I think those are some of the exciting challenges, though, that face us as we develop a strategy. So for at Target, we're really looking on how do we make impact in a big way, but at a local level. We're thinking about that journey and telling those authentic stories along our journey and really focused on problem solving versus only giving. Giving will continue to be an important part, but how do we actually solve problems in the world and communicate that? And one of the biggest things we're doing right now is looking for coalitions to do that because, again, I think what's changed is single companies can't alone change the world just as single governments can't or single NGOs can't. So partnering with folks like Johnson&Johnson or SAP and finding ways to work together to really change the world for the better is something that I think you're going to see a lot more of in the future.
Great. Claudia and Michael, I saw a lot of head nodding. Anything you want to?
No, I totally agree with Daniel. I think one of the challenges that we have is to ensure that all the ecosystem is truly involved under one single goal. From a SAP perspective, for example, identifying those customers that we have common interests, right, mm-hmm. is challenging, right? It's not easy when you have around 100,000 customers and then try to identify each of their priorities in terms of CSR is really, really hard, right? So this is why I think this is a challenge, but it's an opportunity as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think to build on what Daniel said, we are trying to take a top-down and kind of a bottom-up approach in telling our CSR story, in that we are becoming much more stakeholder-specific in understanding, first of all, who are the stakeholders that really matter to us as a company, and what role CSR plays within those different stakeholder groups and as a driver of trust in Johnson&Johnson, and how do we kind of tailor our efforts around the stakeholders' desires and perceptions, yet at the same time We are also looking at a very high level as to, what is our corporate narrative? What are the common threads that cut across all stakeholder groups in terms of, what their expectations are of Johnson & Johnson in the space of CSR, and how do we weave that into our story and tell that in a very consistent way, regardless of who we're talking to.
Great. And as Mike mentioned, we are releasing some research today that investigates this aspect and how do you apply people's thoughts and attitudes towards CSR and align that with a business strategy. And what we found is that you can create segments of people based on their attitudes towards CSR and also their intention to shop based on those attitudes. And we found a continuum. So if you start at the very beginning of the continuum, you have your transaction consumers. And these are the people that just want you to focus on your business. They don't want to hear your stories. These are not the people we should be communicating CSR messages to. As you move up the continuum, you get to your passives. And these are the people that essentially they just don't care. Then you get to the pragmatics who care, but it's not going to impact their shopping decision. They're glad to know that you do it, but it doesn't impact how they purchase. And then we have a segment that we like to call the socially conscious or socially motivated consumer. And these are the people who actually care enough and want to spend their money with people that share their values. And that's not to say that price isn't important to them, it's just less important. They're willing to spend money with companies that they feel good about spending money with. Now, the exciting thing about this to us is not just that they exist. I think they've always existed to a certain extent. My opinion is that the segment is going to grow. Right now, we have that segment at about 17% of consumers. I think the exciting part is the evolution of CSR as a real business strategy, in that you can target these people like you would any other business segment. You can identify the influencers. As Paul said, the social media aspect of how they talk about corporations is becoming more and more important, and they can become part of your business strategy. And Michael, I know that you deal a lot with data analytics in your role and in targeting communications, and I'd be interested to know how your company has evolved and where you're heading in terms of using data along with CSR.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my introduction, it's, we're becoming much more evidence-based in the way that we approach communications and our CSR efforts. And quite frankly, while that happened quite a bit out on the businesses, it's kind of new. It's kind of new to corporate. And so when I came in, one of the first things that we needed to do was really get our arms around this idea of reputation. And what is reputation, and how do you measure reputation? And at a very rational and basic level, reputation is simply the degree to which you're meeting the unique and specific expectations of your stakeholder groups. And implicit in that is, well, who are the stakeholders that really matter to us as a company? Because they're not all created equal. And they don't all drive the same kind of business value together. And so the question becomes, how do you identify those who really matter the most? Because you don't manage reputation for reputation's sake. You manage reputation because it leads to real business outcomes. So the first thing we did was we developed a framework to understand who are the stakeholders that really lead to business outcomes, that lead to financial outcomes for us. And we prioritized those stakeholder groups. And the next thing that we did was we went out, and we're still really in the process of doing this, but we went out qualitatively, and we spoke to them in person, one-on-one, around the globe, in different markets around the globe, to really get into their heads and understand beyond just sort of the very perfunctory, well, innovation is important, doing the right thing is important. What does that really mean? Articulate that for me. What language do you use? What are the very specific behaviors that you would expect of Johnson & Johnson? And so we collected all that information, and then we put it into a quantitative survey that's in field right now. And it's just wrapping up really, but it's going out to those very same markets, those very same stakeholders, but in quantitative numbers now. And the idea is that when that data comes back, it will give us a better understanding of the expectations that these stakeholders have for us, how they differ across stakeholders, and how they translate into drivers of trust and drivers of reputation, which will then allow us to identify where is CSR most relevant, which stakeholder groups are seeking out those values from the company. And what does that look like? What are the very clear and specific expectations that they have for us so that we can develop stakeholder-specific strategies beyond CSR, really, just understanding what are those drivers as it relates to some of the other areas like ethics, like innovation, product quality and safety, as well as being socially responsible. And our hope is that we will identify very clearly who those segments are within the general population, but then across other segments as well. For example, the socially responsible investor. Very important group for us, and understanding what are their expectations and how do they differ from a healthcare provider or from a patient or a policymaker. So that's where we are right now. And again, our goal is to understand what are the levers that we can pull on the CSR front within these different stakeholder groups, and then how do we reach them in an effective and an efficient manner? So that's the work that we're undertaking right now, and we're really excited about where this is going to take us.
And have you seen a growing interest in that type of data in the people that you're giving it to? Or is it still at the point where there's a convincing going on?
There's no convincing going on.
Yeah.
I feel blessed because there's no sell-in that I need to do, and in fact, right up through our executive committee, they're waiting on this information. They're waiting to see what we do with it and what recommendations we bring forward. But we have the full support and resources as well behind those of the head of our Global Corporate Affairs Group, Michael Sneed, as well as Maggie Fitzpatrick, who is our Chief Communication Officer, and the entire ECMC. And we have been bringing them along on this journey, which I think is part of the sell-in process, is walking the square, as we call it, and making sure that all those who need to know about it are aware of it and have an opportunity to shape it and input on it. I failed to mention that we also did conduct interviews with our internal stakeholders to understand where their starting point is and what they're looking for from this work, as well as going out, obviously, to external stakeholders. But that was the sell-in process. It was a very easy sell. I think there's such an appetite for this, at this point. And I'm seeing it more and more in other companies as well. This idea that we need to import this kind of expertise and really be more evidence-based and use data to drive decisions, and also to measure the results of the work that we do.
I think it's a really exciting development, to be able to target exactly who cares about this stuff with very specific messaging that will resonate with them. Just really takes this thing to a whole new level. And I think on top of that, being able to target who's actually your biggest advocates out there.
Yes.
So who are the people that are tweeting about you, talking about you, blogging about you, writing stories, posting on Facebook. Being able to target those people specifically and knowing their reach is quite amazing. And I think it's going to take this game to a whole new level.
Yeah, Daniel, one of the things that I was planning to talk about is a new system that we're creating. It's a reputational intelligence system. And at the heart of it really is a digital listening and a media monitoring construct or a system, where what we've done is we've really refined the way that we listen. Beyond just blanket listening for anything related to Johnson&Johnson, we've really refined our search terms and our taxonomies around the things that we know matter from a reputational perspective, so that we're listening in on the right conversations. We're listening to the right people, and that is allowing us to identify who are those influencers, where are those conversations originating, and what influence are they having on the people who are listening to those conversations, and what was their source of influence as well. And so we're refining that as we go, but it is a part of this intelligence system. We call it the Global Reputational Intelligence System, the GRIS. We need a better name for it. And
We need to do a study.
We need to do a study just for that, right? But it's a very important component, which allows us to connect the primary research with the digital listening in a meaningful way that allows us to monitor in real time how those conversations are unfolding, what the volumes look like, and who's having those conversations, so that we can be very specific in how we target.
It's awesome.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, 2 points you made. Number one is CSR really is a good way for silos within organizations to integrate and work together. A lot of what you just said in building the system are pieces that you may have pulled from different people at disparate times. And then also the importance of employee engagement in CSR. That the employees are an important stakeholder group, and this is really an aspect that speaks to their role in the company and how they can find value in it. So Claudia, I'd like you to comment a little bit. You have worked in Asia. You've had a lot of different regional experiences working with an enterprise environment. Some of the challenges or barriers or your experiences in communicating CSR would be great for you to talk about.
Well, I will say many. I will have to, I mean, the first one is changing mindsets. I think behaviors somehow you could manage, but changing mindsets is really, really hard. And let me give you an example. You know, even trying to convince your own team to do things differently for CSR is really, really hard. And I had this experience in APJ. They were mostly focused on charity partnerships rather than creating social impact. And trying to convince your own team and your own executives is, you know, it's really, really hard. So I think many of you have been in that situation. The second challenge in our industry is the compliance and governance. And you think that sometimes that everything is like in US, right? That, you know, clear rules.
You mean it's not?
And then you go to other regions and you find, I don't know, 300 partnerships across the region. And you're like, where is the focus, right? Where is the, you know, the area that we want to work on? And let me give you an example. When I moved to Asia, we had around 200 partnerships with NGOs. And they will go from blood donation to, I don't know, building houses. And you were like, you were thinking, how SAP is contributing in the long term, right? For the future generations. And then you have to make a tough decision, say, you know, I'm sorry, but we have to focus on education and entrepreneurship. And that change, you know, implies lots of internal discussions, more internal than external, believe it or not. I think another challenge is the demographic gap. When you go to, for example, countries like Japan, most of the generation, I mean, the generation there is mostly 50, 60 years old. So, of course, their priorities are the vision about social commitment is completely different from the millennials. And then you go to India, and guess what? In India, the millennials are the ones who own social responsibility. And they, you know, they have their own commitment, their own perspective. And when you bring this global perspective about what to do in CSR, the millennials, they are very, very strong, and you have to follow them. It's not like they follow you. You have to follow them. What are the priorities? So I will say that the demographic gap is a big challenge that in our industry, we have to consider in every single market. And I will say finally is expertise. I think all of us somehow we are committed with social responsibility, somehow, you know, at personal level, professional level. But when you need to hire the ones that truly know about CSR in the market, it's quite challenging. And I went through that process when I was in Latin America and when I was in Asia. And getting those that really, really know how to create the social impact is not easy. It's not an easy task. You find lots of talent, but the expertise is quite unique. And I will say this was, you know, has been one of the toughest challenges that we had in SAP. And finally, getting your executive sponsorship is not an easy task, right? Especially when you are in the IT industry. The team is, this is a sales company, right? And the priority is closing the quarter. And when you find the right leader, like we have right now, Bill McDermott, that fully committed to CSR, and then his messaging goes from top to the bottom, and everybody embrace his vision. Is quite easy, but it's not easy, for example, at regional level, right, or local level. You find sometimes your stakeholders, they embrace the idea of CSR, sometimes they don't embrace. And as a communicator, it's your role to bring CSR as a priority, right, to the table. And finally, I think trying to engage your customers and your partners to drive innovation through social responsibilities has been one of the challenges too. We, as in the IT industry, for example, we have to understand what is our customer needs, what are the vision, and then we have to identify what is this common vision, for example, with Target or with Johnson&Johnson, and try to work together under this, under this priority. And I'm going to give you an example. In India, as you know, I mean, child abuse is one of the top critical issues there, right? And you will ask yourself, what does SAP has to do with child abuse? Guess what? We have a platform that will allow to help the local government to track those situations across India and follow up through our analytics tools. So it's just, it's not easy. It takes lots of time to identify these opportunities, but once you find it, then you can move on, okay?
Yeah, thank you. Daniel, I'm sure that speaks to you, the whole trying to understand all the different partnerships that people have made and coalitions that people have made within an organization and make sense of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that is one of the hardest things. I mean, as we talk about our CSR journey, I find more and more people within the organization stumbling over themselves because somebody has a relationship with somebody already, and now you're trying to build a relationship with them. And so using tools and good analytics to help track who your most important stakeholders are, and making sure you're being very thoughtful and deliberate in how you engage those stakeholders, how you build and sustain relationships. I think big corporations especially are good at coming in and building a relationship when they need it, but then dropping it when they don't need it anymore. And in CSR, it doesn't work that way, and we need to find ways to build but also maintain relationships over the long term. But I think it does start with what you were talking about, is figuring out who are your most important stakeholders. We look at three basically large buckets. We look at our consumers, of course. We look at the communities where we do business. And we look at our own team members as one of the most important stakeholders. Target employs almost 400,000 people in the United States. So the ability to take that group and use them as ambassadors with a message of CSR is very powerful. But keeping track of that and who's doing what and who's saying what only is becoming more complex.
Yeah.
So would love to use your tools and figuring out how to do that.
And Michael, any other comments on how you plan to measure success, or did you lay out the plan for us already?
Yeah, no, I think I kind of alluded to this GRIS as we're constructing it, and you really what that's intended to do is to identify, monitor, and measure reputational risks and opportunities to Johnson&Johnson. And so as part of that, there's a pretty sophisticated analytic engine model that helps us understand our reputational ecosystem, if you will. So what are all of the variables that drive our reputation? Who are the stakeholders who are important to us in our reputation and driving those business outcomes? And what's the relationship between them? And through the modeling work, what we're beginning to understand as one variable changes, what impact does that have on other variables? For example, trust, or how does it drive changes in perception, which ultimately drive changes in trust, which ultimately drive changes, for example, in sales. So that's kind of the sequence that we're following. And what it does is it gives us the ability to really understand the impact of the CSR programs that we activate, or really any of our corporate equity or corporate action programs that we activate, and puts us in a position to begin to understand the relative impact and help us make better decisions around how we spend our dollars, targeted against whom, and how we really allocate our resources. So we're getting to that point now where it really does come back to data and analytics, because like Claudia and Daniel, we have so many relationships and so many partnerships, and we contribute in so many ways. The question really becomes, what's going to give us the biggest bang for our buck, and how do we place our bets? Because it's not a finite pool that we're working with, or it is a finite pool that we're working with. So that's part of the sort of the measurement program, and one of the outputs that we are driving toward with this system, because it is just so important today.
I think what remains somewhat elusive, and I would love for you to figure it out so I can steal it from you, is the ability to show the actual impact in a person's behavior based on a CSR program. So while our research shows that 17% of consumers will make a purchasing decision based on a company's work in CSR, the question is, do they really? And secondly, if I develop a specific program, can I show the impact that had on sales, or can I show the impact it had on government making a decision, or an NGO taking a course of action? And I think that's the really hard part that, of course, our executives would love to know the answer to. But
That's right. And I'm painting a picture of nirvana. Right? And that's our vision. You have to have a vision to aim toward,
Absolutely.
right? And that's where we're going with this.
Absolutely.
But that's the kind of granularity that we want to get down to. Is really, it's important to know how our actions change perceptions. It's important to know the impact on trust, but ultimately it is about value back to the company, financial value, and how does that really translate into another purchase, and can we get that finite or that granular around being able to measure that, and that's really what we're aiming toward. Whether we get there or not still remains to be seen, but that is absolutely our aim.
that's great.
I just want to add one thing. In SAP, we are doing something differently, not across the regions, but some market units, some of the managing directors, they have decided to add CSR and communications as part of the KPIs for the account executives. So, I mean, to get to that point in the IT industry is really success, right? And then when you see that, the account executives get engaged, not just because it's part of the KPIs, but because also part of their will to support the community. That's when you realize, okay, you did something good for the company. And also, in some cases, in our company, when they close some deals, and CSR is a big component of it, the employees are being recognized sometimes, right? And non-quota carriers. So it's a very, very good example of how we also measure the success of CSR.
Yeah, and I think the more it becomes part of a business strategy and the more it is a KPI for people to measure themselves by, the closer we're going to get to your place, Daniel, where we can prove the value.
Yep.
So we're going to open up to questions here in just a few minutes, but I thought I'd give each of you a chance, if you had anything additional to say that didn't come out of the conversation, to say it now.
I would just start by saying that CSR, to some extent, and a lot of us don't even like the words or the letter CSR, corporate social responsibility, because it feels like we did something wrong and now we have to atone for our sins, which some of you may actually believe. But the role of the corporation in the world has changed dramatically, and the role as simply profit generator has changed, and corporations do play a role in the world as a citizen of the world. And that becomes part of the business then. And so I believe CSR, or whatever we decide to call it in the future, will become more and more ingrained in just the DNA of corporations and what the expectations of consumers are. And so to do it well, you need to be very thoughtful about what your strategy is and how you're going to communicate that out to the world and measure it, quite frankly. And so I think the exciting thing for me, and I suppose for all of us up here, is that while CSR has been around for a very long time, I think it's launching into a space that it's never been before and will become a really prominent place of many businesses around the world. So that's very exciting.
Well said, Daniel. I don't have anything to add beyond that. Thank you.
Well, just one thing is a long-term vision for CSR. When you implement short-term vision, it's really, really hard to sustain. And that's what I have learned from my experience so far.
Well, great. Well, thank you for all your comments, and we'll let the audience, anybody in the audience have any questions they'd like to ask our panelists? I see a couple hands going up. Yeah.
Hi, Carol Cohn from Edelman. That was a great conversation. I'd like to know, how do you measure social impact? Because that could be the harder part here. I did it.
Well, if you allow me,
Yes.
in our company right now, we're mainly focused on education and entrepreneurship. And one of the challenges that we have is to hire consultants in the region, especially, for example, cloud consultants. So we have created some partnerships with the most relevant universities across the main regions. And for us, measuring social impact is, how many of these millennials will come and join our workforce. This is how we are measuring the social impact. This is one of the ways that we are doing it. So.
I think it depends on the issue that you're looking to change. I mean, there's lots of issues that need solving, and I think setting out clear goals or commitments on what it is you want to accomplish and then showing how you've accomplished that is important. So for instance, there's a lot of work going on right now in developing countries around elevating women and girls into greater jobs, into positions of management, et cetera. And a lot of companies talk about their investment in helping women and girls. But what I like to know, and what I think the millennial generation wants to know, is how many of those women and girls have actually been helped, and what does their life look like? How is it different than it was before? And so I think that's the type of social impact that people are looking to see and to measure.
Yeah. And for us, social impact is very important as well. And your comment reminds me of our commitment to the UN Millennial Development Goals, really around women and children. And we work through the UN to quantify that impact. And it's a long-term commitment that we have. And year over year, we do track our success through the UN metrics, really. But each case is a little bit different in terms of how we assess that. But it is extremely important, and it's something that needs to be measured.
Hi, I'm Tanya Hughes from Talk PR in London. There's been a lot of talk, obviously, about data and listening and millennials, everything very digitally focused. But for CSR, how do you keep close to and engage with the digitally disengaged, particularly I'm thinking of senior citizens, elder people. There's an aging population. How do you keep close to them when they're not tweeting or whatever?
We actually do this old-fashioned thing called just talking to people and listening. We're lucky enough to have 2,000 stores around the U.S. and we in Canada, and we use those as listening posts to a large extent to understand what are people talking about in their local communities. What are they concerned about? We conduct a lot of surveys as well. We have a research department that's continuously talking to all the different demographics that shop our stores and making sure we clearly understand what's important to them and what issues are on their mind.
Yeah, and for us, we often talk about the right audience to the right message through the right channels, and it really comes down to the notion of segmenting out the population and understanding what are their needs and their desires as it relates to CSR, and how do you best reach them? Or how do you best allow them to find their way to what you have to say or you have to convey? And we've done a lot with our corporate website and with our social channels to develop kind of a holistic online sort of media strategy, and we're using that quite extensively to help tell our story and to be able to communicate to people in the terms that they want to hear. But then we also have to go beyond that and more directly to some of these these consumers who are a little more disengaged, as you say, and finding clever ways to reach out to them.
And I will say that there is no golden rule about this. And the reason is because, for example, when you go to Japan, it's not easy to convince this 50, 60-year-old generation, right? And then you have to find the common values. And I went through that recently when we appointed a new managing director who is 37 years old, right? And his team is 50, 60s. So it's not easy to put together these two generations. But this guy, he was very smart to find a common goal for both generations. And what they chose was to focus on the tsunami victims in Japan. And most of the victims right now, they are, is the old generation. And what he's doing is he's bringing his millennial mindset into this project. So that's one way. That's one way to do it. But at the same time, other regions and other market units, they behave differently, right? Mm-hmm. And in Singapore, for example, the old generation, they are basically on their own, and actually the new millennials are the ones who are bringing, the initiatives to engage with them directly and bring their issues into the table for SAP. So there is no golden rule. It depends on the market unit. It depends on the on the economic and social issues in each country. Mm-hmm. And you have to be very, very, very careful, and that's what Daniel mentioned at the beginning of this panel, that it's everything, based on my experience, it's mostly local. You have to consider what their basic needs are. Mm-hmm. So.
Now we probably have time for one more question, if anyone has it.
I'm a little curious about one of the aspects of your research, Michael. Mm-hmm. You mentioned, I think, 17% of consumers are, engaged in this way with corporations, and I wondered, my experience is that this may not be quite a linear relationship, but there's some relationship there, that the more socially conscious a consumer is, the less likely they are to believe that a company is sincere or authentic when it does good. Those of my friends who care most passionately about the environment are also the most cynical about corporate commitment. So how do you overcome that?
Well, I think each of our panelists has mentioned at one point the importance of authenticity and the importance of actually doing this because you want to do it rather than just to sell a product or because you think people want to do it. What we're talking about with the 17% is that we know that they care about this, and if you're authentically doing it, and when they seek you out, they can see that you've been doing it and that you have a history of doing it, then that's when it works. It's the people that in the new social age, as you mentioned early on, Paul, you can't hide behind anymore with just saying you do things. You have to actually do them. And I think the people now that are communicating and going out with their strategies are very transparent. And when these people seek out and want to see that and prove that you are doing it, and I think that's why that segment's growing, is because they will spend their money on the right companies because they're now able to validate it. The information is out there to validate, whereas maybe previously, 10 years ago more, it was harder to understand whether a company was actually walking the walk and talking the talk.
Okay, thank you, Michael, and thank you, panel. That was a great way to kick off the event. I really appreciate it, and some great stories.
Thank you.
Thank you.